Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, it's Zoe. I'm your friendly neighborhood Canadian-Australian leadership expert. And my question for you today is, do you love performance management? I can see you singing for joy in the shower saying, yes, I love performance management. It is fascinating and fabulous. I love having conversations about performance with people. Not. And yet it can be such a powerful tool. Now, I've been geeking out on performance management ever since I first learned about it from Australia's leading expert, Stacey Barr, my also good friend, I have to say. But it is absolutely brilliant. And now I have the great pleasure to add to the list of awesome people who know about performance management that I can learn from. And that is my guest today, Hedda Bird. She is the author of this fabulous book called Performance Management Playbook. This book is a leader's guide to everything to do with performance management, from the conversations that you need to have to how to structure your thinking around performance, how to revolutionize your business practices so that you do deliver high performance in teams across the organization and individually. It delivers. I've ordered a hard copy of this book. Now, I don't order hard copies of books ever because they take up a lot of shelf space. So if ever I'm ordering a hard copy of a book, it's because I want to use it and devour it. And I've done so with this particular book. Hedda is engaging and fabulous. She is the founder of 3C Performance Management, all the way from the UK. We have a fantastic conversation about what is performance, the ins and outs of it, the troubles of regular performance management, and how we can all do it better so that we have high-performing individuals, high-performing teams, and ultimately a high-performing organization that delivers on its intentions, which is awesome. So, without further ado, here is Hedda. Woohoo, all the way from Henley-on-Thames, welcome Hedda Bird to the show.
Hi, Zoe. Nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too. We are both at opposite ends of the planet. You're in the UK, I'm here in Australia, tail end of the day, beginning of the day. And I'm so pleased we get to talk with you about A, your fabulous new book, and B, this amazing topic about performance management and high-performing teams. But let's start at the beginning, because no one sort of pops into the world going, oh, I'm going to be an expert on performance management. It's not like you ask a little kid and say, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I want to be a performance management specialist. How did you actually get into this field?
So in a way, it seemed very obvious once it happened. So I'd been working in the global pulp and paper industry. And then I kind of reached mid-career there and looked up and saw that there were no women ahead of me in the industry, really. And the most senior women who were around me were being eased out. And I thought, okay, all right, maybe I need to find something else to do. And I worked for another training company for a while and then set up my own training company. And we did lots of soft skills, you know, a bit of management development, a bit of customer service, a bit of personal development. And what I realized going into lots and lots of different organizations with my colleagues is, if people didn't really know what was expected of them, if they weren't held to account for their behavior, if there wasn't a framework for managing them, frankly, all the training that we were doing was really tick box and didn't really make a long-term difference. So we looked around the market and I saw that in the UK, you could buy how to do an appraisal from about 10,000 suppliers of management development, and you could get any one of 5,000 HR consultants to write you an appraisal form, as it was called then. But nobody was sitting back and going, what are we doing here? What is this all about? What are we trying to achieve? And I've always been really, really interested in the process of organizations delivering results. I just find it a really interesting thing. And so I realized these two things came together. So we thought no one else is setting out to really think about this issue. So that's what we'll do. And that was about 15, 20 years ago now. And that's what I've been doing and working and learning. And I found it's really fascinating because once you unpick performance management, you unpick everything to do with people and organizations.
Whoa, that's a big call. That's a big statement, and I love it. So I have a really good friend who is also a key performance indicator guru / geek. She's a leading expert over here in Australia, Stacey Barr, and she rants on about similar types of things as you do about how do organizations produce results? How do teams produce results? And obsessing about performance. And some of the, anyway, she has quite a few bugbears, but I'm interested in your bugbears when it comes to performance management. So you listed a few things, that you could buy all these performance appraisals off the shelf and whatever. And I could see your eyes rolled a little bit with that. When it comes to performance management, what are the things that tick you off the most? What are the things that really bother you?
So I think the biggest single thing, and of course HR directors will say it everywhere I go, is that people don't talk to each other. I mean, they really just don't talk. They think they're talking, but they're having these transactional conversations where not much communication is going on. So the number of chief execs who've said to me, I've got a great team. They all know the strategy. They all know what they're doing. My door's always open. They'll always come to me. And then I go and talk to the team and they go, oh, and it usually is a he, I don't really know what he wants. He says we all know the strategy, but it's not really clear. Should I be doing this or should I be doing that? And when I'm saying, well, you don't talk to him, I've tried talking to him, but it's not. And I think if this is what's happening in the C-suite, what is happening lower down the organisation? So I think at the heart of it, this is really what it's all about. It's about what does the organisation actually really want people to be doing and how does it want them to be doing it, which is all the behaviour stuff, all the cultural style stuff. And an enormous number of organisations don't have that answer. So it's amazing that they don't, but I'll go.
I know, I'm sitting here going, how do they not know what they're supposed to be doing?
Well, they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing in a big way. But when they sit down and they do their job, they do what they think they should be doing. And then up at the top, the chief exec is saying to me, oh, we're never getting this done. And I'm so frustrated by that. And this isn't happening. And when you ask, well, have you talked about these things? I say, everybody knows, but everybody doesn't know. And I think it's just a human dichotomy about how hard we actually find it to understand each other. We think we're all communicating with each other a lot of the time, and we're not.
This sounds like if that's the juggernaut of the issue, it sounds like a pretty... well, I say basic, fundamental piece. If CEOs think they're communicating and their teams think they are not, what is the solution? How do we fix that?
So that's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? So we use performance management as a route into fixing that. And the first thing that I'll do, I talk about it very early on in the book, is I'll ask a CEO, if this thing called performance management that you've asked me in to fix was working really brilliantly, whatever working really brilliantly looks like, what would actually be different in your organisation? So what is it that you're not getting that you want? And almost without fail, there's a long pause and they say, that's a good question. And then you start to open up. So people think, they often ask me to think, people aren't very good at writing goals, or we need a bit of help on competencies. And very quickly, I'll get into the nub of it and go, this is actually about how everybody is working together and what they're spending their time really doing on a wet Wednesday morning in February. This is what it's really about. And yes, you set the strategy, but we have to turn the strategy into action. And I think it's that piece, isn't it? The story that I tell is I worked for a global financial insurer based in London, a London PLC, but a global operation. And after the financial crash, like many companies, they had to kind of restore their finances. And so they had a plan for growth. And everybody in that organisation knew that the main strategy of the business was to grow. And they called me in to talk to them about performance management, that their performance wasn't working very well. But the main thing was everybody knew they had to grow. So for 2 years, this was the number one thing, and they didn't grow. So I arrive here having been brought in by a fairly junior colleague who, after they'd had a number of frustrations with other people helping them, had said, I think you ought to talk to Hedda. I know you don't normally work with little independent boutiques, but come and talk to Hedda. And I went in and I went round the organisation and talked to people, and almost nobody had growth written into any of their plans or their goals or their objectives on a personal basis.
Really?
Even the salespeople, they were going, well, are we meant to be growing market share, or are we meant to be growing revenue? Are we meant to be selling things for higher? Do you know, there was no, in other words, nobody knew what growth really meant. And yet you would think that it's such an easy word to understand. So when I say that we're not communicating, it's that strange thing. Everybody knew they had to grow, but nobody really knew what that meant for them in their job on a Wednesday morning in February.
It's an important distinction, isn't it? Like, because you could grow fatter, you could grow taller, you could grow wider. And that's a pretty simple way to start to get some traction by like taking a big word like growth and going in which direction.
Yeah. And I think that's obviously it's a big company and they decide they need to go for growth, but it had never really translated into very clear action plans. Other things that will happen is another, actually, this is all about financial services and I deal with lots of sectors, but another financial services company I was working with wanted to have best customer service. They set themselves this target of being absolutely known for best customer service. And then I walk around the C-suite, and of course the finance director thinks the best customer service is the minimum service they can get away with at the lowest possible cost, whereas the customer service director thinks it's putting down the expense, put everything into people thinking you're truly wonderful, and the marketing director thinks it's the best net promoter score, and the human resource director thinks it's the happiest employees. But you can't do all these strategies all at once. And you're sitting there thinking, I can see your face going, I can't believe that it's this chaotic. But actually, it often is, because it seems like they're all talking about things that they're all knowing, but they're not actually surfacing what's really the challenge for them. They're not really turning strategy into action. And if you've got that at the top, then as that filters down, it becomes more and more and more muddled. And then you get everybody thinking, well, I think I should be doing this, so I go and do that. And someone else thinks, well, I think I should be doing this, and go and doing that. And you end up with an organisation where lots of people are working really hard, really, really, really hard, and constantly busy and full of angst. And it never quite delivers.
Well, it's hard to deliver against something that's airy-fairy and not quite defined. It's like, or it's defined in the chief exec's mind. So they are seeing where it's not getting met. Everybody else is like, well, I'm doing my job.
Yeah. And I think people think performance management is this thing we do once a year around appraisals. And my view is it couldn't be more different. It's actually about how do we get what this organisation is. And that, we might be in a local authority, we might be in a hospital, we might be, whatever we're doing, we might be in a very different environment. How do we make this come to life? And for me, it's this thing. So how do we make sure that everyone is doing what we really need them to be doing and working in the way that we need them to work? And there's been some lovely research, which I refer to in the book, in the UK, done about 8 or 9 years ago by an academic called Michael West. And he was working at Aston Business School at that time. And he researched the impact of some HR people policies on performance in the NHS, in our National Health Service, in all the hospitals. And because so much research is done into the hospitals in the UK, you can strip out the difference in performance that's attributed to the kind of hospital they are and the kind of population that they serve. That they do so much research that they're able to strip out a lot of the factors that make the difference. So he decided to compare a couple of different HR policies and how well they were implemented with mortality rates, literally with the number of people who die within 30 days of leaving the hospital or being. And that's a number that's not disputed. We could dispute whether you actually got better, but we can't dispute whether or not you died. So it's a very clear number. Mortality rates are a very clear number. And he found two really, really, really fascinating things which link so clearly to your theme of high-performing teams. He found that in a hospital, the more people who worked in real teams where no one can succeed unless we all succeed. That's his definition of a real team. The more people who work in a real team, the fewer deaths there were, the lower the mortality rate. Now, we can see that if we're, doing a clinical operation and you're a great surgeon, but I'm a lousy anaesthetist, obviously that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That we can't be a successful team unless we're all successful together. But what he showed was that works no matter what role you're in. So even in the tiniest way down in reception, if in reception you and I were each charged to be individually great receptionists, there would be more deaths than if you and I were charged with jointly being a team that ran a great reception. So the team goal, in other words, if you and I have to be individually great, I could be great and you could be useless. But the hospital will perform better if we're both aimed at focusing on making reception be really successful, so that if you're great and I'm not, part of your responsibility is to support and help me be better rather than just be better yourself. And so that we're all focused on the team goal, not on our individual goals. And he showed that the more people who have shared team goals, the fewer deaths there are. Does that make sense? Have I explained that clearly?
Of course, this is really clear. This is incredibly powerful, and the paradigm is really important to highlight. Is that I think it's the difference between having lone wolves in the workplace and having a pack of wolves.
Yes.
We'll just go with that.
Oh, yeah. A pack of something, not sheep either.
A pack of something.
Yeah, a pack of something. But it's about the team. So he found that, and then the other thing that he found one other thing that made a difference, and that is the number of people who agree that they have had a valuable performance review or performance conversation or appraisal or whatever they wanted to call it. Simply the number of people who agree that their review was valuable. So when they don't define what valuable is, that's entirely defined by the person receiving it, saying, did you find this valuable? And that seems amazing. How can me having a valuable performance conversation reduce mortality rates? How can that be? And then you think about, what would it take for me to think that my performance conversation was valuable? And probably I would have known what was expected of me through the years, so that then we would have had a good conversation about have I delivered. I would have had some feedback during the year. I would have known how well I was doing, so there would have been no surprises. I would have got some development, and we might have talked about my development or my career, which is all motivating to me. And as you start to think about it like that, you think, well, why wouldn't an organisation that had lots of people having those kinds of conversations perform better than an organisation where that wasn't happening? And when you think of it like that, of course, it seems obvious. So Michael West did this research, and it had the most enormous impact in the NHS and began to change a lot of how they tried to manage people. And obviously some hospitals picked up on it better than others. But I still use that. And I go to leadership teams and I put up this sign that says good performance management stops people dying. And they all kind of go, what? And I go, well, it's true in the NHS. So if it can stop people dying in the health service, what can it do for you? And then we start to have a talk about what really
I think it's still
matters.
A long bow to draw. Like it's you can identify correlation, but causation, causation.
He talks about correlation. He absolutely talks about correlation. But when you sit back and think about it, you can see why they correlate.
Factor. Yeah,
it's a major contributing factor. So that's the way we go. Absolutely. He's not proving causation. He's proving correlation. And then when you think about why would that be, that all starts to make sense.
In any case, whether causation or correlation, there is an impact on the end outcome, a positive end outcome. And that the analogy to any business is really important here. So what I'm taking from what you're saying is that when we have individual performance measurements that sit independently of team goals, organizational goals, they don't actually contribute to the end result. It's only when we have individual activities and focuses that are within a team/organizational framework that performance is elevated, because we support each other to contribute to the whole. And it's using peer pressure or peer support to increase it.
I think that, how it works, I think is still, there's still partly a mystery, isn't it? In one sense, how do we all work together? How do we make things happen? How does everything work together? I'm absolutely not saying that people shouldn't be held individually to account for how they work, their behaviour, their work ethic, and all of those things. I'm not saying we shouldn't have any accountability for ourselves as individuals. We absolutely must, and it should be very clear what we're accountable for. What I think we need to get away from is the kind of slightly 90s idea that everybody has 6 SMART goals of their own that are independent for anyone else, and they're all ticked off on a list. That what we've shown is that in many, many situations, this research shows that contribution to the team goal is one of the defining outputs of a high-performing team, and that is everybody's individual goals. At least some of them clearly link into team goals. I mean, of course, it varies according to the work that you're doing and the environment that you're in. And if I'm a salesman out on the road, not that many salesmen are out on the road at the moment in the country, but if you were, it's very easy to feel there's nobody going in to this place other than me. I have to do this on my own. But the reality is, in order for a salesman to walk into somewhere and be listened to, there's been a marketing activity, there's been a product development activity, there's been a training. So there's lots and lots of things have contributed to this person even being able to walk through the door. And when we think about performance in that way and start to see it as an ecosystem, then, as you say, the frameworks in the book start to show how it all fits together, and then how, as a manager, we can play our part. So no one person can solve all of this. So the book's aimed at managers and senior leaders. It's got some quite demanding questions in it that I think senior leaders hopefully will pick up and reflect on. And a lot of the NHS research is reported in there in the book with all the links through. So I think the research is still on the Aston Business School website. You can actually go and look at, for those people who are academically minded and want to go and study his work, it is all still there and it's quite widely reported. So I think it's all of these things, isn't it? It's how do we get the best out of people every day? What are we doing to help them deliver what we need them to deliver, to align what made them choose to come to work for this organisation in the first place? Why did they accept this role? What did they hope to achieve from it? What was their motivation accepting it? Helping them achieve that purpose alongside delivering our purpose in the organisation. There we are. I've made a smooth jump into purpose.
Well, we'll talk about purpose in a second. I think this tension, is it a tension or is it a dynamic maybe, between what the individual does and focuses on and their purpose and how it contributes to team, is central to the question of performance management and performance review. So in traditional once-a-year performance reviews, it's like, how did you do, as opposed to how did the team do? And I'm curious about your take on how you balance what the individual does while fitting into a team and organizational ecosystem. How do you single out someone's performance and accountability within an interdependent ecosystem?
And I think we have to always view that in the vast majority of situations, that's art, not science. That there is a matter of judgment that you have to look, but it's about the contribution to the team. So it's about, why am I in this team? What am I bringing to the team? What am I contributing to the goals that we have to deliver, as well as maybe contributing to my colleagues to support them? So there are some quite distinct things. What's the expertise that I'm meant to be bringing? And am I using my expertise to further the team's aims and the team's goals? And then how are my interactions with everyone else in the team either helping or hindering the team to achieve its goals? And I think those are things for which I am absolutely accountable, but it's about the contribution to the team. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I've just jotted down 3 things, really. There's, what is my individual contribution to the team? What is my expertise and how is that contributing? And my interactions, are they helping or hindering? And I think that's just absolute gold when it comes to talking about how someone is performing. And it is so not the conversations that leaders are having when it comes to performance.
I know. But hey, that means that I have a space, to talk to people. And, I and the colleagues that I have who work with me, it's enormously rewarding because people start to go, oh, I want conversations like this. Why would I not want to talk about my expertise, what I'm delivering? Why does a manager not want to talk to me about these things? Yes, if my behaviour is hindering, not helping, that could be a difficult conversation. I am absolutely not disputing that. And I think it's well known, isn't it, that some people who are very expert in very technical subjects, perhaps, senior lawyers, senior doctors, very senior technicians, people, very great expertise, they're often perhaps less aware of how their behaviour impacts other people, and they need perhaps some support. And those can be tricky conversations because they think, I'm doing what you need me to do. Why does how I behave matter? So it's not that those conversations are always easy, but I think they can be clear and that people can see what they're accountable for if you keep those things really strongly in mind. And don't get hung up on my 6 objectives, because have you not listened to organisations where they go, oh, we're 4 months into the year and nobody's written their objectives yet? And like you, I'd be going, but surely they're doing something. Surely they know what to do. And so they're writing all these objectives for the purpose of, at the end of the year, having something to tick off to say they've done. And I'm just going, well, why are we wasting our time doing that? Let's actually talk about the things that really matter.
Well, I think this is a nice segue into what you hinted at earlier, which is purpose. Because that's what we should be focusing every lens through. What is the purpose of the organization? What is the purpose of the team towards that end? What is my purpose within the team, within the organization? They're kind of nested circles or interdependent circles. And it comes back to your first point about how vague people are about their purpose, growth. What the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
So how do you encourage people to dig into this idea of identifying purpose?
So I think, and in the book, as we referenced, there are lots of conversation guides, and there's a whole conversation guide about how a manager could talk about purpose with one of their colleagues. Sometimes you can sit down quite formally and go, right, today we're going to talk about your purpose. Here's question 1. And other times it comes, and I would say if you're a very unconfident manager, even doing that is better than not doing it, because the more you talk about it, even if those conversations feel a bit stilted and awkward to begin with, you won't get better at it until you do it. You won't learn how to do it by not doing it. So the questions really are about, if you're meeting somebody for the first time and you come in as their manager, why did you join this organisation? Whether we're talking about you joining an NGO or local government or a global mining company, why did you join it? And let's be honest, some people will say, because the working hours fit with my home schedule, and they will say that. I can get here in time, and I think that's a perfectly legitimate reason for choosing a role. I'm not going to knock someone who is trying to balance lots of different things and says this role fits with my home schedule. Great. All right. So it fits with your home schedule. So while you're at work, what are the things that you feel good at? What are the things that when you go home at the end of the day, you think, I achieved it today, or I nailed it today, or I feel really good about what happened today? But more often people will say, well, I joined it because I wanted to get some experience in this area, or I wanted to fulfill this thing that I've always wanted to do, or I heard that it was a very great place to work from my colleagues and I felt like I wanted to go somewhere where the culture was right. Whatever it is, you can start to use a few questions around, that's interesting, tell me more about that. I mean, just asking people, tell me more about that. And they will start to tell you what it is about this job that keeps them here. And then you can ask some very simple questions of, what are the things that we could do that would enable you to feel really good about your work every day? And then they will start to talk about the things that block them. I mean, they might talk about the parts of the job they don't like, and you can both laugh and go, no, none of us like that bit, but that bit we all have to do. Do you know, you can have an adult conversation about this stuff, but it's all about just tapping into getting people to talk And managers often think they have to come in and do all the talking, whereas actually they need to have some good questions and then be quiet and just say things like something else.
And that's one of the things I loved about your book, Hedda, is that in each section there's conversation guides, and each it has a beginning, middle, and end, which we were laughing about before we hit record. You being a playwright and involved in performance, and how you're always in, act 1, act 2, act 3, which is beginning, middle, end. And the conversations are all full of fabulous questions. I loved that part of your book, and really, really helpful questions. And just listening to you now, I'm like, oh, I want Hedda to be my manager. I'd love to have conversations with you of like, oh yeah, what is the thing that I feel good by the end of the day that I feel like I've nailed it? Yeah. What a great conversation to be having. And as a manager, having a conversation with your people to have them feel excited and inspired by their work, even if they did pick the job because it's pragmatic and practical for them, you can still bring meaning to it after the fact.
Yeah, and they're still working for you. They're staying there. And, one of the things we say in some of the workshops around is nobody gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to be really bad at work today. I'm going to do the most terrible job I can possibly do. I mean, how many people get out of bed feeling like that? Most people want to come in. They want to have a good day. They want to feel like they've achieved something. That's what they want to do. Our challenge as managers is to have those conversations to, first of all, enable those things to happen, but also maybe to say, look, Zoe, you want to go and make that podcast about surfing. Actually, we're not running a podcast about surfing. We're running a podcast about management. So maybe you could do the do you see what I mean? I'm using a ridiculous example, but so the manager's job is to harness all that energy and excitement and intelligence that everybody has and focus it on the things that really matter. And you could say the whole book is just full of conversations that will help people focus on the things that really matter in a way that makes it, essentially enjoyable and pleasurable to work. Not all day, every day, because life isn't like that, but most of the time to enable us to do work that we come home and feel, yeah, I did a good job today. That was worth doing it.
Yeah. And that just makes life sound so much more hopeful when you can anticipate a good day at work. What about the bad days? What about the days when you actually have to deal with somebody who is underperforming? They've stuffed up, it's consistent, and you're like, I might have to sack them. So that's part of performance management too. What's your approach to it?
Yeah. So I think we need to do some very clear things here. And I tend to say that it falls into 3 areas. So sometimes it's capability, that they're not actually very good at doing the job. Technically they're not good enough. Sometimes it's what I call work ethos. So we might describe them as lazy or careless, or they're perfectly capable of doing it, but they don't really do it. It's all a bit mediocre. And sometimes it's about their behaviour. Technically, they're doing the job very well, but they're just being very difficult in how they interact and being disruptive with other people. So there are 3 very different situations there. But there's a 4th situation, and the book talks about this. Before you start tackling one of your team's supposedly poor performance, you need to ask yourself if it's your fault. Have you actually given the feedback that says, this isn't what I want, this isn't the right behaviour? Have you been clear about what you did want? Are you constantly changing your mind? There are a number of sort of checklist questions. One of my colleagues does a lot of work on the employee relations side, where she ends up dealing with the grievances and having to exit people. And she says 99% of the time, if the manager has sat down with a person at the beginning a long time earlier, we wouldn't have ended up here. We'd have solved the problem. But when you do sit down, you have to be really clear, and you have to remember it. It seems really awful to deal with it, and it can feel really bad, especially if you are going to have to terminate somebody. That can feel very uncomfortable. But you have to remember that you've got another group of people in your team, and if you don't deal with these problems, you are burdening all the rest of your team who are trying to work hard. And I think, again, the research shows that nothing demotivates your best performers more than the free riders or the incapable or the bad behaviour, those people being allowed to get away with it, as the language goes. That your best people want you to hold everybody to account. And if you don't do that, the people you most value are the people you will most upset. So when you are preparing, I put a little model, which I won't go through. There's a model in the book of how to do it. And there are other models available. But the main thing is be really clear about possible outcomes before you start. So one outcome could be that this person goes, yeah, you're right. You nailed me. I'll get better. I'll sort it all out. And everything becomes perfect. All right. Now, that's not a very likely outcome, but it is one outcome. And then you can go through, a number of different outcomes, which might end up with they end up crying. I end up getting cross. We have a terrible row and they storm out. All right. Which is a terrible, awful outcome. But if you write down all the possible outcomes that might come, which might be, ideally you want to get to a recognition, perhaps maybe even a recognition that this is not the right role for them, and that a managed exit can be a perfectly positive thing to do. It might be that they simply need to move to another role in the organisation. And I have seen that in larger organisations, that's obviously easier than in smaller organisations, that their capabilities are better used somewhere else. Many people, again, it's a cliche that people get promoted to their level of incompetence. You might often find people in roles where they really struggle, and you need to find a way to perhaps move them to another place where they're not going to struggle. But in the end, you need to be really clear. This is the challenge. This is what needs to change. Yes, you have to listen and make sure that you are getting the full context. So, of course, they might say something in a meeting that makes you go, oh, okay, I didn't know that. That needs me to rethink. But hopefully you've done your homework before you have the conversation. And then you have to get to a conclusion that is going to move everyone forward. And that may be some form of exit. It may be some form of change of role. It may be a commitment that they will get the right train in the morning to get to work on time. And it absolutely needs to be really clear that we're going to reevaluate at this point, and then we'll see what progress we've made. Now, the earlier you can do that in a life cycle of a performance problem, the easier it is to deal with. But if things have gone really pear-shaped, quite often, sorry, I use that phrase pear-shaped. I think it's very British. I don't know if things have gone wrong.
It's very popular here in Australia too, so don't worry.
Okay. So if things have gone really pear-shaped, sometimes, the person you're having the difficult conversation with is actually a relief. It's a huge relief to just talk about it. So try not to be emotional, be really clear, and keep in your mind, not doing this is going to give you more grief with all the people who really are doing a good job than dealing with it. So I won't pretend it's easy. It's nobody's favourite job, but it's about being clear and writing it all down beforehand.
There's a lot at stake if you don't do it, that's for sure. So I want to ask you now about high-performing teams. So switching to high performance instead of underperformance, what are your key tips for cultivating high-performing teams?
So I think the first thing that a high-performing team needs is to be really clear about what it's there to deliver. And that goes back to that first conversation we had, that they've managed to get beyond that we're going to do best customer service into a very clear shared view of what best customer service is and what that means for each of them. And that could take time, and it needs they need to challenge each other around the room to check that they do really all have the same understanding of what they're talking about, because we know that it's easy to use language that we all think we understand, but actually we've all got different interpretations of it. So having absolute clarity is the first challenge. Then I think a high-performing team needs to have strong enough trust between each other that they can then afford to be creative and think differently and try out new ideas. And I know the research that Google has done has put what they call psychological safety as one of the key defining characteristics of high-performing teams. And I'm sure that you've talked about that with other people on these podcasts. But an environment where the team feels safe enough with each other to say, do you know what, we could tackle this completely differently, or actually, I know that you've been working on that over there, but it's not really working for me. And can we find some other different way of doing it? So I want to call it creativity. Other people might call it innovation, but the team is able to allow itself to think differently, because then it will open up new possibilities for delivering its results. And then lastly, I think they just need to have really great communication between themselves, whether that's social communication. Now, they don't all have to be best mates. They don't all have to want to go out, to dinner every night or spend the weekends together. But they do need to be able to professionally enjoy each other's company and professionally have professional respect. And if you've got that quality of communication whereby there's professional respect, there's professional enjoyment, so that coming to the team meetings is, a professionally enjoyable thing to do. Yeah, it may not be quite the same as your favourite trip out in the evening, but it's a professionally enjoyable thing to do where they can enjoy each other's expertise. Then you will get a team that has a chance of delivering on the result. And now it may have escaped your notice, but those things begin with 3 C's, which is clarity, creativity, and communication. And that is what the 3 C's stand for in our company. And I don't push it hard.
That's your business name.
That's the business name.
Clarity, communication, and
creativity.
I got so excited by your 3 C's. And what was the last one?
Creativity.
Creativity. Love it. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Hedda, I totally recommend your book, The Performance Management Playbook, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes. Is there a podcast or a book that you would recommend to listeners?
So I think, like lots of people, especially in the last 2 years, I feel bombarded by all the change that's going on. I deal with multiple clients. I deal with a lot of complexity, and I'm sure many of your leaders deal with all of those things. When I am feeling overwhelmed, the book that I go back to over and over and over again is Nancy Kline's book, Time to Think. And she just has some very simple models based on David Rock's neuroscience work around just allowing your brain time to think. And it's not meditation at all. It is thinking about the challenges, the problems. She most of it's about work, but she shows how people can use it in other environments. And it's a way about how you can learn how to think yourself more easily and how you can be a very simple thinking partner in 10, 20 minutes with someone else. And we use a lot of her ideas in a lot of the training that we do, and find that people can have really powerful thinking where there could be a thinking partner to someone else. And in 10, 15 minutes, sometimes you can help people have reached a moment of clarity about whatever it is they need to do at work. And I just find it a really good book just to go to when I just feel overwhelmed with things, and it just slows you down and gives you that moment.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for that recommendation. I love a good book recommendation. That's terrific. Hedda, this has been really powerful. I've loved our conversation. I've taken heaps of notes, and I am so excited to share this with the podcast listening crew. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Zoe. It's been delightful to talk to you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I absolutely loved that conversation. I thought Hedda was fantastic. She was so energizing and had so much to share. My key takeaway, I think, oh my goodness, there's so many. I liked the observation that if you're having a conversation with somebody that you manage, that you talk about their contribution to the team goals, that you talk about their expertise and how that is contributing and adding, and you talk about their interactions and how they are aiding or abetting the team performance. I love this idea as performance reviews, as individual performance embedded in a team environment. It just makes so much sense to me, and it really highlights the ecosystem that we have in organizations that is often ignored. We all need each other. We all interdepend on each other. And if we can incorporate that in how we are showing up and how our behaviors and our performance is interacting with one another and contributing to each other's success, yeehaw, this is like an evolutionary leap in organizations and leadership maturity as a whole. So there you go. That was my big insight. This was the last interview in the series on leading performance, in particular high-performing teams. I hope you've enjoyed the series over this summer quarter. It's summer here in Australia. And we are about to launch into a brand new season, a brand new quarter with a different theme, leading culture. And the subtopic is all about hybrid teams. So you can see how performance leads into culture. And so we're going to be discussing and exploring the tensions and opportunities of working hybrid. What does that mean for team dynamics? What does it mean for culture, and how we can do it better? I hope you really enjoy that piece, all the interviews that we've got coming up, and the exercises and reflections we've got around that. It's the theme that we also have in our Amplifiers program, which is our flagship course. It is designed for CEOs and managing directors who are big thinkers with big hearts, who want to make a big difference. And 2022, I think, is going to shape up to be an extraordinary year. Unlike the 2 previous years, it's going to be extraordinary for different reasons. And I just feel the energy in the zeitgeist around this particular year. It's the start of a new year. I get that novelty and momentum is happening around us. So if you want to leverage that energy and be part of a group of high-performing CEOs, managing directors, and senior executives, then consider joining up for Amplifiers. You can find all the details on my website at zoerouth.com. Click on Programs and click on Amplifiers, and it's all there. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what are your challenges for the year, what your opportunities are, and let's see if we can smash your goals in a high-performance way for the rest of this year. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.